In the shadowed corners of Carl Jung's vast body of work lies a spiritual tradition rarely discussed in mainstream psychology, a system of psychological detoxification that Jung himself practiced but shared only with his closest students. While Jung is celebrated for concepts like the collective unconscious and archetypes, his deeply personal spiritual practices remained largely hidden from public view, considered too esoteric for the scientific establishment of his time. Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." This awakening forms the foundation of what we might call Jungian spiritual detoxing, a process of cleansing the psyche not of external contaminants, but of the psychological toxins that accumulate through modern living, projection, repression, and psychological fragmentation. The psychological toxicity Jung identified manifests as a disconnection from our authentic self. In our daily lives, we accumulate psychic debris, suppressed emotions, denied aspects of personality, and projections we cast onto others. These create what Jung called psychic congestion, preventing the natural flow of psychological energy or libido. The symptoms appear as anxiety, recurring emotional patterns, and a persistent sense of meaninglessness, what Jung might have called spiritual aridity. This three-day process draws from Jung's personal practices and theoretical framework to create a modern spiritual detoxification. Each day focuses on a core Jungian concept, confronting the shadow, engaging with archetypes, and advancing your individuation process. The practices combine journaling, active imagination, symbolic ritual, and meditation, all techniques Jung himself utilized in his own psychological work. It's important to clarify that this guide represents an interpretation of Jungian concepts applied to contemporary spiritual practice. Jung himself was cautious about prescriptive approaches, believing that each individual's path to wholeness was unique. As he stated, "The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases." Throughout this journey, we'll explore the forbidden not because it's taboo in the conventional sense, but because these practices require us to venture into territories of the psyche that society often encourages us to ignore or suppress. Jung's approach was considered radical precisely because it demanded facing aspects of ourselves that conventional wisdom suggested we should repress or deny. Over the next 3 days, you'll embark on a journey through your own psyche. The work may be challenging, as Jung warned. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. But the potential reward is what Jung called the treasure hard to attain: psychological wholeness and spiritual renewal. Begin your day in silence. Find a quiet space where you won't be disturbed. Place a journal before you and light a candle, symbolizing consciousness illuminating the darkness of the unconscious, A.S. Jung wrote. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. Your shadow contains all you've denied, repressed, or deemed unacceptable about yourself. Today, we begin the process of reclaiming these disowned aspects. Start by writing this Jungian prompt at the top of your page. The part of myself I most wish to hide from the world is... Then allow yourself to write continuously for 15 minutes. Don't censor yourself. Remember Jung's admonition that the shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. When you've finished writing, read what you've written, observing any resistance or discomfort that arises. This resistance itself is valuable data, a signal that you're approaching shadow material. Close your session by writing, "I acknowledge these aspects of myself without judgment." Find a comfortable position and close your eyes. Begin with several deep breaths to center yourself. Visualize yourself standing in a dimly lit room with a large mirror covered by a cloth. This mirror reflects not your physical appearance, but the aspects of yourself that you've hidden from consciousness. As Jung noted, in psychological terms, whatever we're unconscious of, we project, and now you're about to withdraw those projections. Approach the mirror and slowly remove the cloth. Allow your shadow to take form in the reflection, not as a monster, but as a neglected part of yourself seeking integration. Notice its appearance, its emotional quality, the energy it emanates. Jung believed that the meeting with oneself is, at first, the meeting with one's own shadow. Greet your shadow as you would a long-lost aspect of yourself. Ask it, "What do you need me to know?" Listen for the response that arises from your deeper consciousness. Before concluding, mentally extend an invitation to your shadow to join you on this journey toward wholeness. As Jung said, there is no light without shadow and no psychic wholeness without imperfection. Dreams were essential to Jung's psychology, as he considered them the direct expression of the unconscious psychic activity. Tonight, you'll practice dream incubation, the ancient art of inviting specific dream content. Before sleep, write in your journal, "I ask my unconscious to reveal an aspect of my shadow that needs integration for my spiritual wholeness." Place the journal beside your bed with a pen ready. Create a receptive state by eliminating distractions and engaging in 5 minutes of deep breathing. Visualize yourself descending a staircase into the realm of dreams, receptive to whatever messages your unconscious may send. Upon waking, whether during the night or morning, immediately record any dream fragments, images, emotions, or thoughts. Don't analyze yet. Simply document the raw material. As Jung observed, dreams are impartial, spontaneous products of the unconscious psyche, outside the control of the will. The shadow, in Jungian psychology, consists of aspects of yourself that your ego has rejected or never recognized. These might include aggression, selfishness, sexual desires, creativity, or power, anything deemed unacceptable by your conscious self-concept. Jung argued that to confront a person with their shadow is to show them their own light. Shadow work isn't about eliminating these aspects, but integrating them consciously, transforming their expression from destructive to constructive. Projection occurs when we unconsciously attribute our own unacknowledged qualities to others. As Jung explained, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. When you feel intense, irrational emotion toward someone, whether attraction, repulsion, or fascination, a projection is likely at work. Identify projections. Pay attention to exaggerated emotional reactions to others, qualities you consistently criticize in others, traits you idealize or romanticize in others. People who trigger immediate, inexplicable discomfort remember Jung's wisdom. The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. By withdrawing projections, you reclaim your psychological energy and sovereignty. Approaching shadow material requires both courage and compassion. Jung cautioned that there is no coming to consciousness without pain, but this discomfort is generative, leading to greater wholeness. When confronting difficult shadow content, 1. Maintain psychological distance. Observe the shadow material without becoming overwhelmed by it. Use phrases like, "I notice a part of me feels," rather than "I am too." Avoid moral judgment. The shadow isn't evil. It's simply unconscious and unintegrated. As Jung stated, "I'd rather be whole than good." 3. Look for the positive potential. Every shadow quality contains transformative energy when properly integrated. Anger can become healthy assertiveness. Selfishness can become appropriate self-care. Point 4. Practice self-compassion. Remember that the shadow formed as a psychological adaptation, often in childhood when you had limited resources for processing experience. Point 5. Start with manageable aspects. Begin with shadow elements that feel less threatening before addressing deeper material. By day's end, you will have begun the alchemical process Jung described as the union of opposites, taking the first step towards psychic wholeness by acknowledging what has been denied. As Jung reminded us, in all chaos there is a cosmos, in all disorder a secret order. Begin your second day by entering what Jung called active imagination, a method he developed to engage directly with unconscious content in a waking state. Find a quiet space where you won't be disturbed for at least 30 minutes. Start by relaxing your body through progressive muscle relaxation, tensing, and then releasing each muscle group from toes to head. Once physically relaxed, close your eyes and imagine descending a staircase into your inner world. At the bottom, visualize a door that A.S. Jung instructed. The first stage of active imagination is like dreaming with open eyes. Allow an archetypal figure to emerge as you open this door, perhaps the wise old man/woman, the divine child, the warrior, or another figure that appears spontaneously. Trust whatever image presents itself. Engage in dialogue with this figure. Ask, "Who are you and what guidance do you offer me?" Then allow responses to arise naturally from your unconscious. Record this dialogue in writing or speak it aloud. Remember Jung's guidance that the unconscious wants to flow into consciousness in order to reach the light of day. Conclude by thanking the archetypal figure and gradually returning your awareness to your physical surroundings. As Jung noted, the meeting with oneself is, at first, the meeting with one's own shadow. This meeting is the test of courage on the inner way. Archetypes, according to Jung, are universal patterns or motifs that emerge from the collective unconscious. They manifest in dreams, myths, religious symbols, and artistic expressions across cultures. While the number of potential archetypes is limitless, certain core patterns appear consistently in human experience. For this midday practice, you'll work specifically with the archetypes most active in your current life situation. Begin by considering which of these primary archetypes resonates most strongly with your present circumstances: the persona, your social mask; the animus/animus, your inner feminine/masculine; the hero/heroine, the questing aspect of self; the caregiver, the nurturing aspect; the ruler, the organizing, governing aspect; the creator, the innovative, artistic aspect; the sage, the wisdom-seeking aspect; the explorer, the boundary-crossing aspect. Once you've identified your dominant archetype, create a symbolic representation, a drawing, a found object, or even a bodily posture that embodies this energy. As Jung stated, the archetype is a tendency to form representations of a motif, representations that can vary a great deal in detail without losing their basic pattern. Spend time contemplating this symbol, asking, how is this archetypal energy expressing itself in my life? Is it manifesting in its light aspect, its shadow aspect, or both? Journal your insights, noting any patterns of archetypal expression that seem imbalanced or unconscious. Jung believed that ritual speaks directly to the unconscious through symbol and action. This evening, you'll create a personal ritual to honor and integrate the archetypal energies you've identified. Begin by creating a sacred space. This might be as simple as clearing a table and placing meaningful objects that represent different archetypal energies. Include representations of both the archetypes you feel connected to and those you've neglected. Light a candle to symbolize consciousness and awareness. Stand before your archetypal altar and speak aloud. I honor the multiplicity within me. I recognize that I am composed of many archetypal energies seeking expression and integration. For each archetypal symbol, acknowledge its presence with a simple statement. I honor the warrior, caregiver, creator/etc. within me. As you do this, physically touch or hold each symbolic object, creating a somatic connection to the archetype it represents. Conclude by writing a brief commitment to expressing each archetypal energy in a balanced way. As Jung advised, the archetype of the self has functionally the significance of a ruler of the inner world, i.e., of the collective unconscious. The collective unconscious represents Jung's most revolutionary concept, the idea that beneath our personal unconscious lies a deeper layer of psychic material shared by all humanity. Jung described it as a common psychic substrate of a superpersonal nature which is present in every one of us. Unlike the personal unconscious, which contains forgotten or repressed content from your individual experience, the collective unconscious contains archetypes, universal patterns that have never been conscious. These manifest as powerful emotional and imagistic motifs across cultures and throughout history. Jung identified numerous archetypal patterns, including the self, the archetype of wholeness, and the regulating center of the psyche, the shadow, the rejected aspects of the personality, the anima/animus, the contrasexual aspect within each person, the persona, the social mask we present to the world, the mother/father, parental archetypes that transcend personal parents, the child, representing newness, potential, and vulnerability, the trickster, embodying chaos, disruption, and transformation. These archetypes express themselves through dreams, myths, religious symbolism, and artistic creation. As Jung noted, all the most powerful ideas in history go back to archetypes. To identify which archetypes are dominant in your psyche, consider the following exercises. 1. Mythic resonance. What mythological figures or stories have always fascinated you? Your attraction to certain myths often reveals active archetypes in your psyche. Point 2. Role analysis. List the primary roles you play in life: parent, professional, friend, etc. For each role, identify the archetypal energy that powers it. Are you the warrior at work, but the caregiver at home? 3. Projection identification. Notice which archetypal figures you project onto others. Do you frequently idealize people who embody the sage? Do you find yourself attracted to those who express the lover or rebel energy? 4. Dream cataloging. Review recent dreams for recurring archetypal figures or scenarios. The archetypes most active in your unconscious often appear in dream content, A.S. Jung observed. The archetype is essentially an unconscious content that is altered by becoming conscious and by being perceived, and it takes its color from the individual consciousness in which it happens to appear. Archetypal energies themselves are neutral, but their expression can become imbalanced. An overly dominant hero archetype might lead to restless achievement without fulfillment, while an inflated caregiver might result in self-neglect and martyrdom. To balance archetypal expression. 1. Recognize one-sidedness. Notice which archetypal energies you express freely and which you repress or neglect. Point 2. Honor the opposites. If you strongly identify with the ruler archetype, consciously make space for your inner fool. Jung emphasized that the greater the tension between the pairs of opposites, the greater the energy that comes from them. 3. Integrate shadow aspects of each archetype. Every archetypal energy has both constructive and destructive potential. The warrior can protect or destroy. The lover can connect or engulf. Point 4. Allow archetypal energies to evolve. Different life stages may call for different archetypal expressions. As Jung noted, the afternoon of life is just as full of meaning as the morning. Only, its meaning and purpose are different. Remember Jung's wisdom. Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. By day's end, you'll have begun the process of recognizing and balancing the archetypal energies that animate your psyche. Begin your final day by creating what Jung considered the supreme symbol of psychological wholeness, the mandala. Jung discovered the psychological significance of mandalas through his own practice, noting that I sketched every morning in a notebook a small circular drawing, which seemed to correspond to my inner situation at the time. Gather simple art supplies, paper, colored pencils, or markers, a compass or round object to trace. Create a sacred space free from distractions. Center yourself with several minutes of deep breathing. Draw a circle, which Jung identified as the primary symbol of wholeness and the self. Within this circle, allow images, patterns, and colors to emerge spontaneously. Don't plan or analyze. Simply let your unconscious express itself through your hands. As Jung advised, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. The mandala you create represents your psyche's current state. The center typically symbolizes the self, the organizing principle of the psyche, while the surrounding patterns represent various aspects of your personality in relation to this center. When your mandala feels complete, spend time in contemplation of the image. Notice which areas feel harmonious and which feel discordant. These patterns reveal the current state of your individuation process, the journey towards psychological wholeness that Jung considered life's central purpose. Jung recognized that genuine psychological transformation requires a symbolic death of old patterns before new consciousness can emerge. He wrote, "There is no rebirth of consciousness without pain." For this practice, find a quiet place where you can lie down undisturbed. Place a light blanket nearby. Begin with deep breathing to center yourself. Imagine yourself lying in a tomb or cave, a symbol of the unconscious and the transformative darkness that precedes renewal. Feel yourself surrendering to this symbolic death. What aspects of your identity, your habits, or your beliefs are you ready to release? As Jung noted, the first half of life is devoted to forming a healthy ego. The second half is going inward and letting go of it. Allow yourself to experience the dissolution of these outdated aspects of self. When the sense of release feels complete, imagine a small light beginning to glow within your heart center. This light represents what Jung called the transcendent function, the psyche's capacity to create a third position that transcends opposites. Feel this light gradually expanding throughout your body, representing psychological rebirth and the emergence of a more integrated self. As this expansion completes, physically rise and wrap yourself in the blanket, symbolizing your emergence in a renewed form. Close with this Jungian affirmation, "I am in the process of becoming whole, integrating all aspects of myself into conscious relationship." This evening's practice culminates your 3-day journey, focusing on what Jung called the coniunctio oppositorum, the union of opposites that characterizes psychological wholeness. Create an altar or sacred space containing symbols of polarities within your psyche: light/dark, masculine/feminine, rational/intuitive, social/solitary. Include your mandala from the morning practice as the central image, representing the unifying self. Light a candle and begin by acknowledging Jung's insight that the self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the center of this totality, just as the ego is the center of consciousness. Speak aloud the primary psychological opposites you're working to integrate. For each pair, create a physical gesture that symbolically brings these polarities together. For example, if integrating strength and vulnerability, you might clench one fist, strength, and open the other hand, vulnerability, then bring them together in prayer position. Write a letter to your future self describing the integrated state you're working toward. As Jung advised, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. Conclude by speaking this Jungian affirmation: "I honor the process of individuation unfolding within me. I commit to conscious participation in my own psychological development." Individuation represents the core of Jung's psychological system, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are. Jung defined it as the process by which individual beings are formed and differentiated, having as its goal the development of the individual personality. Unlike standardized developmental models, individuation is unique to each person. It involves bringing unconscious contents into consciousness, differentiating oneself from collective identifications, and integrating the various aspects of the psyche around the self. The self-archetype stands at the center of Jung's model, the organizing principle of the entire psyche, both conscious and unconscious. Jung described it as not only the center, but also the whole circumference which embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the center of this totality, just as the ego is the center of consciousness. While the ego, our conscious identity, may identify with certain qualities and reject others, the self encompasses all aspects of who we are. Symbolically, the self often appears in dreams and visions as a divine figure, a perfect geometric form like a circle or square, or as quaternity, fourfold, patterns. Wholeness, for Jung, didn't mean perfection but completeness, the integration of all aspects of the psyche, including those deemed negative or inferior. He wrote, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries." Jung believed psychological growth requires reconciling opposing forces within the psyche. Try these practices. 1. Psychological typing. Identify your psychological type using Jung's system. Thinking/feeling, sensation/intuition, introversion/extroversion. Then deliberately develop your inferior function through specific practices. If you're highly logical, engage in artistic expression. If you're primarily intuitive, practice detailed observation. Point 2. Dialoguing with opposites. Choose an internal polarity, such as your inner critic and inner child. Write a dialogue between these aspects, allowing each a full voice. Look for a third position that honors both perspectives. Point 3. Symbolic reconciliation. Create physical representations of opposing aspects of yourself. Gradually move these symbols closer together over time, eventually allowing them to touch or merge, representing psychological integration. Point 4. Dream amplification. When opposites appear in dreams, such as being both pursuer and pursued, amplify these images through active imagination, allowing the dream to continue unfolding while awake. A.S. Jung noted, "The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can never be solved but only outgrown. Individuation is not a destination, but a lifelong process." Jung emphasized that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Consider these practices for ongoing development. 1. Maintain a regular relationship with the unconscious through dream work, active imagination, or artistic expression. As Jung advised, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." 2. Notice synchronicities. Meaningful coincidences that Jung believed represent the ordering principle of the self. Record these experiences and reflect on their potential significance. Point 3. Engage with symbolic systems like mythology, alchemy, or religious iconography as maps of the individuation process. Jung found that these traditions contained wisdom about psychological transformation. Point 4. Build a relationship with what Jung called the transcendent function, the psyche's capacity to create a third position that transcends seemingly irreconcilable opposites. Point 5. Remember that individuation unfolds in spiral fashion. You'll revisit similar themes throughout life, but with deepening understanding. As Jung noted, there is no linear evolution. There's only a circumambulation of the self. By day's end, you'll have established practices for continuing your individuation journey beyond this 3-day intensive. As Jung reminded us, the aim of individuation is nothing less than to divest the self of the false wrappings of the persona and the suggestive power of primordial images. Over these 3 days, you've engaged with core elements of what might be called Jung's esoteric legacy, practices and concepts that venture beyond conventional psychology into the realm of spiritual transformation. You've confronted your shadow, engaged with archetypal energies, and begun the process of individuation. As you integrate these experiences into daily life, remember Jung's counsel. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. The practices introduced here are not one-time exercises, but ongoing disciplines for psychological and spiritual development. Jung himself emphasized that this work is never truly complete. He wrote, "The goal is important only as an idea. The essential thing is the opus which leads to the goal. That is the goal of a lifetime." The spiritual detoxification you've begun is properly understood as the first steps on a lifelong journey of psychological unfolding. Perhaps Jung's most profound insight was that psychological development is inherently spiritual. By making the unconscious conscious, we participate in what he called a transcendent function of the psyche, by which a transition is made from one attitude to another. This transition represents not merely psychological adjustment, but spiritual evolution. As you continue your journey, carry with you Jung's ultimate wisdom. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are.